Good day, and welcome to this explainer. I am your host, and today we will step directly into the role of your senior management counsel. We're going to examine one of the most complex operational challenges you face in the enterprise today, the deployment of large language models, and specifically, the deeply misunderstood problem of hallucination. We will approach this with rigorous precision, dissecting not just what this phenomenon actually is, but precisely how you must architect a strategy to manage the residual risk it creates. Let us begin by grounding our theory in immediate operational reality. Picture this scenario. Your chief risk officer is preparing for a highly scrutinized board presentation. Prompted by a public failure at a rival firm, the board asks a very direct question. How confident can we be that the systems we are deploying will not produce confident wrong answers that drive material consequences? Well, the honest and frankly uncomfortable answer your chief risk officer must deliver is that the firm cannot, in fact, be completely confident in the strict way the board expects. And this brings us to a fundamental conclusion. Hallucination is a residual risk requiring operational management, not elimination. We must completely shift our paradigm here. It is not an anomaly you can simply patch or engineer away. It's an ongoing exposure. You must manage it through your existing familiar enterprise risk frameworks. The concept of persistent risk isn't entirely unique to AI, of course, but its specific texture is unfamiliar to most boards, which is exactly why it demands explicit, structured governance. But before we can manage it, we must define it accurately. Let's look at probable text versus true text. You see, the term hallucination is terribly misnamed. It implies a cognitive malfunction, as if the machine is simply confused. It isn't. What we're actually seeing is a fundamental mismatch between the generative process the system is built for and the truth conditions you, the executive, require. The system is mathematically trained to generate probable text, but your board, they expect true text. Those are completely different categories. When they diverge, the system produces highly fluent output that simply has no connection to reality. And that leads directly to this critical insight. Hallucination is a structural feature, not a bug. Because these systems produce text optimized to fit the statistical patterns of their training data, rather than verifying absolute truth, this is a permanent characteristic. You cannot simply rely on scaling up to a massive new model, nor can you trust the system's internal confidence scores to screen out errors. The model will deliver a complete falsehood with the exact same grammatical authority as a verified, undeniable fact. Recognizing the 6 operational patterns of hallucination. Understanding this structural reality logically transitions us into mapping the specific behaviors. If we know this is a permanent feature, rigorous management requires us to identify exactly how it fails. There are 6 distinct patterns an executive must recognize by name when they inevitably surface in your enterprise deployments. Let's examine them precisely. First, fabricated citations. This is a highly consequential pattern. The system produces a confidence statement supported by a reference to a book, a legal precedent, or an academic paper. It looks entirely plausible. The author names fit the field perfectly, the journal sounds legitimate, the dates align. But the source either simply does not exist, or it doesn't contain the claimed information. If your use cases touch legal, medical, or academic analysis, your enterprise is vastly exposed here. Another common manifestation is plausible-sounding specific facts. Here, the model fabricates discrete dates, percentages, or names. Now, why does this occur? Well, in domains where its training coverage is shallow, the model is designed to produce a specific answer rather than intelligently acknowledging the limits of its own knowledge. It essentially fills the statistical void with a fabricated yet incredibly plausible detail. Consequently, we frequently encounter confident answers in shallow training domains. You must understand that a language model uses the exact same authoritative register for a highly specialized, poorly documented regulatory topic as it does for a widely established historical event. The acute danger arises when the user doesn't realize the domain is highly specialized and therefore fails to apply the necessary rigorous skepticism. Perhaps even more subtly dangerous are internally consistent narratives not connected to reality. The system generates a multi-paragraph analysis that hangs together beautifully. The internal logic is flawlessly sound. The conclusions follow the premises perfectly. But the premises themselves? Utterly fabricated. An executive evaluating the response purely by its internal coherence, rather than verifying each foundational claim, will be easily deceived. In dynamic, multi-turn interactions, you must also anticipate a confabulated history of the conversation. You might have a lengthy interaction and suddenly the system inaccurately states what was previously agreed upon earlier in that exact same chat. This is particularly treacherous. Why? because it fundamentally violates the human user's implicit trust in the system's short-term memory. Finally, observe the degraded performance on slightly modified problems. A system may flawlessly execute a familiar task, but if you introduce a slight, critical modification, instead of recognizing that crucial nuance, the model confidently produces a wrong answer based on the original familiar pattern. It relies on probability, you see, not true comprehension. Now, as we shift our strategic focus, we must recognize that hallucination risk varies sharply by task type. There is a robust, predictable pattern here. Tasks that are open-ended or creative, like brainstorming a marketing strategy, carry very low risk. However, tasks requiring precise factual recall, such as exact statistical claims or legal citations, carry heavily elevated risk. Your operational management must be calibrated entirely around this variance in task type. Before we pivot to solutions, I must explicitly warn you of a vendor-driven illusion, the trap of assuming next-generation models will eliminate hallucination. Do not design your deployments on this assumption. Yes, absolute error rates may fall, but the structural root cause, optimizing for probable text over true text, remains completely untouched. If you build your strategy waiting for hallucinations to disappear, you will inevitably discover that your deferred verification workflows were critically needed today. Architecting the mitigation strategy. So, how do we proceed? We now dedicate the final third of our explainer to the resolution phase. Because the limitation is permanent, an organization must deploy a specific, layered sequence of operational and AI-augmented mitigations to counter these structural constraints head-on. The foundation of your architecture involves 3 steps. 1. Restrict use cases. 2. Pair with retrieval systems. And 3. Require explicit verification. You begin by confining use cases to harmless tasks where risk is inherently neutralized, like drafting an internal email. From there, ground your organizational data by pairing the model with high-quality retrieval systems. Retrieving specific, approved documents drastically reduces fabrication. Finally, for high-stakes output-driving material action, explicit human or programmatic verification loops simply must be engineered directly into the workflow. We then layer in advanced mitigations. Step 4, prompt for uncertainty. Systematically instruct the model to flag its own uncertainty, forcing it to admit when your documents are silent on a matter. Step 5, cross-check models. For critical decisions, execute multiple invocations or use entirely different models, automatically flagging any disagreements for human review. And Step 6, arguably the most important, build organizational habits. Your primary line of defense is culture. Train your users to expect hallucinations, to verify outputs systematically, and to immediately report incidents. Designing governance for residual risk. I must state this quite firmly. Even with perfectly layered mitigations, restricted use cases, retrieved context, strict verification, and cultural training, residual risk remains. The system will still occasionally produce a confident wrong output that slips through your defenses. Therefore, this residual risk must be explicitly managed through formal, structured enterprise governance. A mature governance regime rests on 4 pillars. First, explicit risk acceptance by senior leadership, acknowledging the reality of the technology. Second, documented incident response processes to contain and systematically learn from failures. Third, continuous monitoring for the specific patterns of failure we discussed earlier, ensuring the deployment's reliability does not slowly drift over time. And fourth, honest, transparent communication with affected stakeholders regarding exactly what the systems can and strictly cannot do. To synthesize this into an actionable framework, there is a fundamental question to ask for responsible deployment. You must determine exactly what specific failure profile the enterprise is deliberately, intentionally accepting. This forces the explicit acknowledgement that responsible leadership demands. It's not about avoiding risk entirely. It is about defining precisely what risk you are willing to own. And so, we conclude our analysis with this pivotal question. What is your organization's residual hallucination risk, and are your incident response arrangements documented and tested? As you return to your enterprise strategies, I leave you with this final provocative thought to audit your own reality. The cost of answering this proactively is invariably lower than the cost of discovering your limitations through a highly visible public failure. Thank you for joining this explainer. Until next time, maintain your operational discipline.